the Constitution is just a legal document. Legal documents require that there be people under the law who are able to be guided by some type of deeper ethic than just what the law itself can provide.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Narrative Podcast. Mike Andrews and Aaron Baer joining you today, and it is going to be a busy couple of weeks here around CCV. Aaron,
we're running.
No better way to kick off this stretch for us than to square off in fantasy football this weekend.
Is it you and me this week?
It is you and me this weekend. It is go time.
Oh,
Narrative
man,
fans.
it's going down.
There's some extra spice on the line. We will be sure to update you on the outcome of that epic showdown.
Still the best part of our fantasy football league is our very sweet and kind HR director here has the best team name ever. That might be an HR violation, as because her husband's a big Packers fan, and their team name is That's What Cheesehead. And I was like, this is so funny, but we didn't even know if she got the joke at first. And her husband was like, you should just name it this.
Right.
And she doesn't get the joke. It's a good Office reference. But
it's an Office reference for his persistent HR violations by our HR. I don't know if you could weave that web any finer.
It's too good, but that's exciting. Well, and it was the joy of this. I've never had a more stacked fantasy football team because I think a good half of the league has never played fantasy football before. And so
true.
All of the ladies in the league just drafted all of the Buckeyes that are in the NFL.
Kind of hard.
Yeah, which is very sweet. But yes, please do take, Justin Fields in the third round. And that's
you're
great.
Sitting there getting like the second ranked player with the seventh pick in the first round.
Yeah, anyway, sorry.
We have
not a fantasy football podcast.
It could be, though, if we keep Mahan away. We can sports as much as we want. This is why you tune into the Narrative. We know that you love the banter that kicks off every episode.
And the fantasy football takes.
In all seriousness, we need you to take a moment.
Yes.
Give us a 5-star review. Share the podcast. Help us build our numbers, folks. Yeah. We haven't made an appeal in a while.
Leave reviews. I will. The thing is, we can tell by the listener downloads that we're getting good downloads, but you guys got to leave reviews. So this is our plea for leave those reviews and those the ratings. They help us reach more folks.
And stop mentioning David Mahan when you do leave a review.
Please. Those
it is going straight to his head.
Actually take us backwards.
Well, I mentioned the busy few weeks that we've got coming up. We kicked it off actually with some news this week, as our listeners know. You had a very heartfelt episode last week about Charlie Kirk, and he certainly was coming to our gala in Cleveland, supposed to next week, and we were able to get in some of Charlie's friends to help us honor him. We found out this week that Allie Beth Stuckey is going to come, and Pastor Luke Barnett, two people who knew him pretty well. This should be a fun night up in Cleveland to honor his memory.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, the outpouring of encouragement from friends all over the state, even the country, of hey, we got to move forward with the gala. And also just on not just for the sake of we're not going to be intimidated, but we've got to press this mission forward. And we need to, raise funds for CCV and push forward with what you're doing. And I'll just tell you, one, I had met Pastor Luke Barnett, who is Charlie's pastor at Dream City Church in Phoenix. I'd met him years ago when I was working out there, and always, they do amazing work. And that was a friend of a friend connected us, and he almost instantaneously said, yes, we're happy to come out, honor Charlie, and help you guys, carry on. And then I got to say with Allie Beth, I'm a big Allie Beth Stuckey fan. I will tell you, I know for some of our older listeners, they might not know who she is, but you look at the reach she's having with millennial moms and young women, Gen Zers. She was huge with TPUSA. She is just an incredible voice, and even she is around our wives' age, and is a mom, and she's because of that, she's very particular about how much travel she does, and I know she wouldn't mind us sharing this. She had closed off her travel for the month, right? She wasn't taking any more speaking requests, especially 2 weeks out. and was so gracious because of the what happened with Charlie, the assassination. She reopened her booking to come out for us, and that was just so kind. And again, I think these two people in particular are going to be able to not just talk about who Charlie was, but put into context the moment we are in our country, put into context where Charlie's heart was, and also how we carry forward. And so this is going to be a gala unlike any other. But I'm really looking. I was kind of dreading it after everything happened. I just didn't know how we go forward from here.
Yeah.
And now I'm really looking forward to Thursday night.
Yeah, and I think the point you made about both of these individuals making last minute plans to join us also says something about Charlie and what he meant to them, that they would be willing to honor his legacy by honoring the speaking engagement. And it's going to be a great night. You know, the news of his assassination and some of the details that have continued to trickle out over the past week, still in the news cycle. And one thing we were talking about before we got started here, Aaron, is today we found out that Jimmy Kimmel got canned for the comments that he made, because he's continuing to push that narrative that, this is actually a extreme right-wing MAGA shooter with all these beliefs. It's one of the right-wingers who did it. And it just raised the conversation in my mind as we've seen this. You know, we've obviously pushed back against the idea of cancel culture, but at the same time, the type of speech that we've seen, as whether it's teachers or just notable employees of notable companies that have gone very public with statements about against Charlie Kirk and in celebrating his assassination, you see reports of them getting fired. It doesn't feel like cancel culture, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Like, is this just like because we're on the right side of it this time, or how are we making the decision?
Right. No, I love the juxtaposition of cancel culture and consequence culture. Again, Jimmy Kimmel is free to say what he wants. You have people on the left spinning this to say, oh no, they did this because of Trump and because of the federal government. And by all means, if the federal government were to come in and say that guy needs fired for what he said, I would have an issue with that. Elected officials certainly can criticize things people say. That's a part of free speech generally. But the idea that you can say whatever you want free of consequences, nobody's ever agreed with that. And there is a difference, right? I'll say I see cancel culture on the right that I don't like. A great example of this was from a few weeks ago, and I purposely did not want to bring it up on the narrative. It's enough in the rearview mirror now that I'm okay talking about it. But there was that really embarrassing video of the woman Phillies fan who took
the ball from the home run.
From a kid. Yeah, and it was a very embarrassing moment for her. Just looking at, she looked like a classic liberal, Karen, for lack of a better phrase. I don't know how you describe her. And apologies
to our Karen fans,
to our Karen listeners who are named Karen, but you get what I'm saying there. And the right, I saw on X. I mean, again, both you and I saw it, Mike. Our algorithms are probably very similar. Baseball and conservative, we're getting the same thing centered out. But this was everywhere. And people started looking up who she was and tweeting about her nonstop. That to me was conservative cancel culture, and I'm not okay with that, because this is a private person who just so happened to get on camera doing something very embarrassing and very unfortunate, and we don't need to be finding out who she is and making her life miserable. That's we all can see that and be like, oh, that stunk. People shouldn't be that way.
And it worked out okay for the kid. He got to meet Harrison Bader. He got an autographed bat.
It was all great. But that's finding a random person and projecting our political ideology onto them and purposely making their life miserable. That's conservative cancel culture.
Yeah.
Right.
There's an element of digging involved in it too, whether it's a current thing that happened or if you're going back into somebody's past to try and bring something into the present.
You're looking for a way you're going out of your way to make that person's life more difficult. That to me, that's cancel culture. I want nothing to do with that stuff. The Jimmy Kimmel stuff, though, is like, no, listen, if you say something, especially that's a lie, and especially something that's so morally repugnant, like, yeah, there's consequences for those things, right? Just like there's consequences for all of us if we say or do something really stupid. And Jimmy Kimmel being fired for that, that's, or at least placed on indefinite leave, which is ostensibly fired. And I think, for all of us that were really listening to when all the Stephen Colbert stuff happened, I remember hearing Jimmy Kimmel say himself he didn't expect his show to go many more years just because the finances of these shows don't work much anymore. So you put all of that in there plus this kind of messaging, and you're like, yeah, of course people don't want anything to do with this anymore. So I obviously am very excited that our culture can now at least look at what Jimmy Kimmel did and say, we agree this is wrong, right? We shouldn't, one, lie, but two, also be mocking the people. Somebody like Charlie Kirk that was just assassinated. And as an aside too, the more we go into these things, the more I get frustrated. I'm so tired of the folks who are, speaking out or putting out statements about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I don't understand why everyone on the political left feels the need to caveat their statements of remorse with Charlie Kirk and I didn't agree about anything, but listen, it doesn't matter what you agree. If somebody gets shot in the throat and murdered, it's awful. Full stop. Yeah. Like no one's going to look at Bernie Sanders and say, oh, Bernie Sanders thinks it's bad Charlie Kirk was shot in the throat. He must obviously be a secret right-wing conspiracy
right
guy. I don't know. Like it's and I juxtaposed this earlier with when the Minnesota state lawmakers were murdered in their households in cold blood in an awful, like, haunting situation. I did not see a single state lawmaker or Republican leader or conservative say they may be Democrats, but nobody deserves this, right? Like, no, we can just say this is terrible. Nothing like this should happen. And just, again, it's such a sign of how politics is the religion of the left today. And they can't even put out a humane statement without having to make clear that their politics are still pure and intact.
Yeah. I think Gavin Newsom probably got as close as anybody did on that, which is surprising given how many
oh my gosh,
the wall things that guy has said throughout his political career. But that in that instance, I think he got it right.
Yep.
And we can call balls and strikes on that one. Well, we want to help you think through things like this as we're talking cancel culture and consequence culture and the difference there, and just a lot going on in the world. And a couple other ways that we want to help you do that is with our Essential Summit, which is coming up in a couple weeks. It'll be followed by the March for Life. These are exciting events too, and we got a special treat this week from Willie Robertson, who recorded a promo video for us.
Oh man,
just so great.
Yeah, maybe we should tag that in here just so you guys could I didn't know this was coming, and Willie just shot a cool little video and shot it over. So maybe we can link it in there. But
what's up, guys? This is Willie Robertson, and I cannot wait to come to the Essential Summit there in Columbus, Ohio. You know what I did? I came all the way. I am doing this from Michigan. That's how excited I am. I wanted to come on Michigan soil to promote the summit in Columbus, Ohio. Aaron and the CCV team have an incredible lineup of conference. We're going to be talking about kind of all the crazy stuff that's going on in the world with us, but we want to leave you with ways to live out your faith. And I know God has so much in store for you. How you need to live it out in your homes, how we need to live it out in church, how we need to live it out in our community. So I'm so excited. October 2nd, get your tickets, the Essential Summit right there. I will be there, and I'm bringing the fire. So I'll see you there.
Super exciting. And again, the summit has we've only done 1 year. This is our second year doing it. We're almost completely sold out. So if you haven't got your tickets yet, be sure to get those in. But the ability, especially right now, to step back and really dig in deep, is just something we don't get a lot of time to do typically. And the summit's just become my favorite time to be able to do something like that.
Not only the event itself, but you really get that sense of fellowship and camaraderie, because I don't want to say that it's super niche, that you can't get something out of it, but there's something about being in the room with believers who understand the importance of cultural engagement or political activity.
Right.
Even just dutiful citizenship of voting and things like that, being informed of what's going on.
Well, I think that's right, Mike. And I mean, it's the other reason why we added a breakout track this year. So we have the general admission, faith in action. We have the track for business leaders, for pastors, for educators, and then we added the pregnancy center track. And for exactly that reason, to obviously all together during the big plenary sessions, the keynote sessions is amazing. That's when the big speakers, the Willie Robertsons and Rosario Butterfield and Carl Truman, those guys speak. But those breakout sessions where you get to connect with others, and that was one of my favorite things that came out of last year, was hearing about the relationships that were built, that came out of the summit. And I also just want folks to know, yesterday we had more law enforcement in this building than it was just the uniform after uniform of.
Normally they're looking for me.
Yeah, exactly. Normally they're scouring this building, but on just making preparations to keep the summit safe and the march safe after the assassination, we're taking these things very seriously, and I feel really good about the safety and security. But also, the bottom line for me, Mike, is this person, Tyler, whatever his name was in Utah, this was an act of terrorism. Mm-hmm. He wanted to tell folks like us that we're not safe if we go out and we speak truth about these issues, and we're not going to be bullied. We're not going to be silenced. The gospel needs to reach every corner of the earth, and so everywhere we go, we're going to make sure we proclaim the goodness of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
But also, too, that day, this shooter brought into question the value of every life. That to me is what makes me so frustrated about how the left is talking about Charlie Kirk, saying, well, I didn't agree with Charlie, but nobody deserves to be executed in the way Charlie was, right? We could set aside that these are the same people that oppose the death penalty, but there's some people that are applauding, Charlie's assassination, or applauding, Luigi Mangione. But like our country right now does not understand that every life is made in the image of God and is infinitely worthy and infinitely valuable. And that's why we've got to continue to march. That's why we're not stopping. Even, who knows if people are being inspired by this crazy guy off in Utah. I pray not. We're doing everything we can to be safe, but no matter what, we can't stop, because this guy is questioning the value of every human life, and it's up to us to declare that everybody matters.
Yeah, amen. That was well said. One more thing we want to touch on here in the news segment today, and this is breaking news. I know we've said that a couple of times, but as we were sitting down to record, Sam hit send on the email. So CCV filed an amicus brief in the case that was filed to hold up the SAFE Act, which prevents sterilization of kids through transgender medicine and procedures and that kind of stuff. So filed an amicus brief in that case. Tell us about the brief and what it involves.
Yeah, so, just to bring everyone back up to speed, this was the House Bill 68. DeWine vetoed it. We overrode the veto. ACLU filed a lawsuit in Franklin County. We won in the county court. Court of Appeals blocked the law from going into effect. Supreme Court did not overturn their ruling, but said the law had to be allowed to be in effect while it's being appealed before the full court. So we filed a friend of the court brief in partnership with Independent Women's Forum, where we specifically went after the lower court's reasoning, questioning whether the legislature had the right to do this. And the lower court had made some pretty crazy arguments. We don't need to dig into all of the things they said.
Well, and there's the fact, too, that they allowed the law to stay in effect, even though they ruled against it.
Exactly.
That's kind of suspect.
Yeah, they knew that this wasn't going to win. But, again, this is one of these things, a few things. One, this is where we have to pay attention to the who's on our state Supreme Court. Remember, these are elected officials on the state Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. So we need to pay attention to where they're at and what they're doing. But two, we have to stay engaged. It's not just enough to vote to get people elected. It's not just enough to work to get bills passed. We have to see these things all the way through. And why does it matter? Well, earlier this last week, Nationwide Children's announced they were completely ending all of their gender medicine on kids, right? What's big about that is they, in the SAFE Act, the one little compromise that had to get in there to get this thing passed was that kids that were currently on gender medicine, they were going to let them finish, right? Nationwide is saying, nope, we're done with everything. This is a Goliath that fell, and it's because of law. They cited the SAFE Act. And so, again, we need the court to rule the right way. We're laying out the clear legal case that they have no justification for blocking this law from going. If the legislature can't prevent hospitals from sterilizing kids, then we can't regulate medicine at all. So it's a really clear case, and we expect to win, but it's something we got to keep an eye on.
All right, friends. Well, now you are fully in the know on all of those things. Don't forget to get your tickets, leave a review, and prepare for Aaron's beatdown in fantasy football.
That is
coming this week.
An epic one. I still don't think so. You probably just drafted all Titans. I haven't even looked at your team lately.
Not true. I only have 2 on my team.
Both of them. Having any Titans, I feel like, is a downfall for you.
I'm not playing. I'm playing the kicker because they can't score a touchdown.
That's true. That's not bad. Yeah.
Well, for our interview this week, great conversation coming up with Andrew Walker from Southern Seminary. What a great thinker, and just really engaged in the cultural moment. And we covered a lot of ground with him. He's got a lot to say, and it's hard to even tee up exactly what we talked about because it goes so many places. But it follows logically. I promise you'll be able to stick with it. I think it'll benefit you. And it's coming up next on The Narrative. Hey, Narrative listeners. You know, Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. And we're back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, David Mahan, joined now by Dr. Andrew Walker, who serves as the Associate Dean in the School of Theology and as Associate Professor of Christian Ethics and Public Theology at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Kentucky. He's an author, speaker, and commentator with a focus on Christian ethics, public theology, and the common good. Andrew, it's so great to have you joining us here today on The Narrative. Thanks for the time.
Hey, guys. Great to be with you. Thanks for the invitation to be here.
Well, we could use some good Christian ethics and public theology these days with everything that's been going on in the world. And even as we were saying hi here on the Zoom call, we started jumping into conversations and questions that we should have just saved for the recording. So where we were at was just talking about at Southern, what's the atmosphere been like in the wake of the Charlie Kirk assassination? How are the students doing with the news?
Sure. So it has been a pretty major moment for the campus. The night of the assassination, there was a student gathering. You might liken it to a vigil, perhaps, to kind of reflect upon the circumstances. And then the president of the institution, Dr. Moeller, kind of felt that there was some real urgency to this issue and decided to call an audible. And on Thursday morning, changed the chapel programming for the morning away from a traditional sermon to a panel discussion with myself and 2 of my colleagues and Dr. Moeller, just kind of reflecting on the significance of the moment and how Christians need to think about it. And what struck me was while I was sitting on stage, I was looking out into the audience, and faces of students were noticeably forlorn, and they looked like something traumatic had happened. And so I think that this really speaks to the effectiveness of Charlie Kirk really being a voice for a generation of younger conservatives. And then at a place like Southern Seminary and Boyce College, there's natural affinity for the worldviews here. And so this is a place where someone like Charlie Kirk was very popular. And again, that was reflected quite evidently of the campus.
Yeah, I want to dwell there for a second, Andrew. I think for a lot of older Americans, folks like that, Charlie's, he might get lumped in with the Fox News personalities, right? And the folks you see out on the campaign trail, things like that. And he certainly was in those circles. But for college students and below, we had a vigil here a couple nights ago in Columbus that I was at, and it was a different. Typically you have a Republican crowd, something like that, and it's a lot of gray hairs, right? A lot of older folks there, but it was a younger crowd than I think we've ever seen. And I used to always joke in political campaigns, if somebody would say, hey, I got an idea for turning out the youth, I'd say, I got a great idea for that money. Let's just set it on fire. It'll be a lot faster for us but Charlie reached the next generation more than anybody else. And the numbers prove out that he actually drove out those voters. What was it about Charlie that spoke to the upcoming generation more than really any other, political leader I've ever seen?
Yeah. So I think, he was 31 when he passed away. I think that means he roughly had 12, because he started doing kind of his activism when he was 18, I believe. So, he had roughly 13 to 14 years, which is kind of taking us back to 2010, 2011, when social media is still. So what Charlie Kirk was able to do was to leverage social media at the right time, but it wasn't just a social media thing. It was invariably that he was a happy warrior. And I think that, the reputation of conservatives being stodgy, holed up in their traditions, kind of angry, embittered towards the culture, he represented the total opposite of that. And one of the things that I've been reflecting upon in the aftermath of his tragic death is, we're told that we live in kind of a post-rational society or a post-persuasion society. I think Charlie Kirk taught us that persuasion is still possible. And I think if we're going to carry that torch forward, it means that we need to be those happy warriors. And what I love about Charlie Kirk is that, he never backed down from stating his convictions, but he was willing to do it in a cheerful way, in a cheerfully combative way, even, I would say. And then also he would go on to what we would consider hostile territory. So when he goes on Gavin Newsom, the most progressive governor of the United States, he projects joy, enthusiasm. He's able to find some common ground with Gavin Newsom. It sends the signal that conservatism is not synonymous with entrenchment or anger. It's synonymous with being daring, with being courageous, with being hopeful and optimistic, and not having to sacrifice your convictions in the process.
I think Charlie, as much as anything, embodied this shift we've seen on the right. And Andrew, you and I are kind of in like the same class of conservatives coming up over the years. I still remember your cover.
That's another way of us saying we're now old.
We're now old, exactly, right? I also like I
catch David though. So
exactly, yeah, he's got us beat a little bit here, but I still remember your cover with Ryan Anderson on Citizen Magazine, just like an all-time banger. But I really feel like especially when I got into politics, the idea that conservatives, Christians, whatever, could talk more like normal people than the left could seemed impossible, right? We just could. And that was, right in the throes of the most intense debates over gay marriage, and we couldn't not talk like robots all the time. And then you see where we are today, where you have people like Charlie Kirk, like Vivek Ramaswamy, like JD Vance, that'll go anywhere and talk with anybody and can sound like a normal person. How'd this shift happen? One, not just on the right where we could start talking like normal people, but two, the left all of a sudden is the one that's, so finely messaged that they sound like an AI bot.
Yeah. So I don't know that it's because they're so finely messaged. I think it's because the left is just absolutely weird and bizarre and anti-reality. And I've said this on my own podcast several times. To simply be normal today is going to code as being right wing. Mm-hmm. What I mean by that is, when RFK and Secretary Hegseth came out with this video talking about like getting fit, and they're in the gym together. The New York Times released an article saying how that like is going to lead to body shaming individuals who can't pursue physical fitness. And it's like, okay, hold on a second. So the response to getting fit is to say, well, some people can't get fit, so we shouldn't talk about it at all. And so you have two individuals who are doing something profoundly normal, which is exercising. They're serving in a Republican administration. So all of a sudden, if you like to exercise, the New York Times just kind of made you unintentionally more right-wing and more conservative now for doing ostensibly normal things. If you believe that kids need moms and dads, a truth that all human civilizations held to up until about 20 minutes ago, that now codes as conservative in our culture. So I don't know that the conservatives had to do anything different other than to let the terminal consequences of progressivism work their way out into the ether in the public square, and to recognize like this is really bizarre stuff. They're not marrying, they're not reproducing. The children that they do have, they're more likely to abort. They're in favor of transgender ideology. They view everything through the lens of an oppressed dynamic. There's no such thing as truth. All of that runs so contrary to common sense and basic human political organization in society. So I think the vibe shift that we're having right now has less to do. It has something to do with conservatives being more muscular and forthright. It also has something to do with progressives just actually being intellectually consistent with progressive presuppositions and realizing how untenable that is as a worldview and as an operating ethic for the rest of society.
Andrew, a lot of times the left will like to brand Christians and folks like Charlie Kirk as just too political. They can be political, but Christians cannot be political. Or if we are, then we are Christian nationalists, right? What is a Christian nationalist today? Are you a Christian nationalist? And more importantly, is Aaron a Christian nationalist?
Yeah, a Christian nationalist is anyone who has Orthodox faith and is disliked by the New York Times.
Right.
Yeah. That is actually how we define Christian nationalist. No, I joke in saying that. I mean, listen, I've written on this ad nauseum at this point. Christian nationalism is a term that needs to be immediately defined. And how it's defined is going to be, a question of an eye of the beholder type of gloss. If you're a New York Times editorial opinion writer, it's probably the case that you think if anyone is a conservative Christian and who thinks their faith ought to relate to the public square, they're going to fit the bill for being a Christian nationalist. I think that's cynical and a misunderstanding of how religion relates in the public square. But I just think that's how haphazardly and incautious that term has gotten applied in this conversation nationally. Now, I do think that there are real Christian nationalists out there, but even those who are self-identified as Christian nationalists have some disagreements among themselves about the full implications of being a Christian nationalist. So someone like Joe Rigney and Doug Wilson would be comfortable with the label of Christian nationalism. But then you have someone like Stephen Wolfe, who has his own definition of Christian nationalism. And there's some overlap between those two, but there's also some differences. So that gets back to my bigger argument that I've made for a long time, is that it's endlessly pliable to the point that because you can't really give definition to it, it's not a useful term, unless you're going to adopt one particular person's definition. If you are a Stephen Wolfe Christian nationalist, okay, that's something for you at least to define yourself by or against. That gives us a working taxonomy of ideas and principles related to the project. And if that's the case, then I am not a Christian nationalist, but I'm also not this strict separationist, Baptist Joint Committee liberal from the 1980s and 1990s. I believe in a robust place for religion in the public square. For example, I love the fact that the sitting vice president of the United States quoted from the Nicene Creed yesterday on Twitter when he was hosting Charlie Kirk's radio program. There's nothing in my Baptist taxonomy of church and state that makes it improper for a sitting vice president to recite the Nicene Creed in a public forum. That's totally fine. That's a separate thing than asking a United States president to convene a general synod of a religious body. That's a separate thing than putting blasphemy laws into place either in federal jurisdictions or state jurisdictions. That's a different thing than putting a preamble into the Constitution that says we are a Christian nation. We all acknowledge Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior. I think that there are problems in all of those particular situations that I've just described to be arguing for a robust place for religion in society.
So there's one Charlie Kirk clip that's been rattling around my head quite a bit over these last few days. And it's something we've talked about around CCV before. And I just feel like it's becoming more and more stark. Charlie talked about one time how, the John Adams quote that our Constitution was made wholly for a religious and moral people. And that's how we were able to have a system of government. His point in this, we were able to have a system of government because we have a broadly virtuous people. We did have a Christian nation of predominantly Christians. This was not, a lot of times when we talk about how America was it was founded as a Christian nation, they're thinking that we had like Christianity required in our U.S. Constitution, even though it kind of wasn't a lot of our state constitutions. But just broadly, it was a people that were predominantly of the same Protestant faith. And so because we were all broadly Christian then, and there were Catholics there as well, obviously, but because we were broadly all Christian, then you could have so much more liberties protected because there was a lot more self-regulation happening now. And Charlie's point in this clip, and honestly, something we've talked about around here before, is we are not a Christian culture anymore. And I think that's the reason why you see a lot of the struggles we have that we're dealing with in politics all the time, right? We're spending more money than ever on education, and we're getting, 70% of fourth graders aren't proficient in reading. We're spending more money than ever on mental health. Mental health's getting worse. More money than ever on drug treatment, drug addiction, and addiction's getting worse. One, do you agree with this framework, Andrew? Mm-hmm. And where do we actually go from here? I mean, does this mean we need to start reevaluating the role as Christians? Do we need to start reevaluating the role of government in our lives and maybe being more in favor of a more restrictive government to compensate for people who aren't self-regulating?
So I would begin by stating, yeah, well, let me absolutely agree with what Kirk was getting at. That statement from John Adams is famous for good reason, because he's saying something profoundly true about biblical anthropology. And what he's getting at there is that no matter how much law we have, you could have a million laws on the books. If human beings cannot restrain themselves and self-regulate or self-govern, no amount of law is going to be able to sufficiently or adequately paper over the endless lawlessness of human beings. And keep in mind, too, that the Constitution is just a legal document. Legal documents require that there be people under the law who are able to be guided by some type of deeper ethic than just what the law itself can provide. I'm not a libertarian. I believe that the law can teach individuals or guide individuals in the direction of the moral good and justice and righteousness. But unless there is what I would call like a pre-political communitarian ethic that has formed the consciences of the body politic, society is going to devolve into what Judges talks about, that everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes. That is the terminal expression of what we would call autonomy. And that's basically being a law unto yourself when you've cast off all other law. We need God's law as a way to constrain us. And I think what that means is, I'm a Baptist in these conversations, which means I don't see, I'm fine with civil religion. I'm fine with civic Christianity. But that won't work in the long term, apart from that being grounded in a local church setting where individuals are being actively discipled under the preached word and held accountable to their Christian confession in the confines of a local congregation. And so if you're asking where do we go as a society, this is going to sound like really like a platitude, but it's not a platitude. We need more people to preach the gospel, and we need more people to be serious disciples of Jesus Christ. That is ultimately the answer to our society, is conversion. We can hope that those living downstream from a Christian culture can adopt the mores and customs of a Christian culture. But if there is not long-term regeneration around those customs, in 1 to 2 generations, unregeneracy and unbelief will work its effects in the long term, which will ultimately be corrosive for society.
Andrew, would you also say that we also need believers to be political, right? Because I was listening to an interview you were in recently, and you said we no longer live in a time where we can afford to be non-political. I think I know what you're talking about. To me, politics is man's way of getting their needs and wants met within God's civil government, which I don't know how you don't do that. Even if you don't mean to, you do it. How would you define politics, and then what should the believer's role be in politics?
So I think the easy answer is, we hear politics and we think Republican, Democrat, we think November elections. That is actually like a very superficial and thin definition of politics. It's included in our definition of politics, but it's a very thin expression, because ultimately politics is ultimately about how we order our lives together in society. And if we work from that assumption, you may not be interested in politics, but I guarantee that you absolutely are political. from little things like, do you like to drive on safe roads? Do you expect to be able to go to the store safely? Do you want to have more money in your pocket or less money in your pocket? What do you think kids should be taught at school? All of these things are eminently related to politics, but they're really just questions about, how do I want to live my life in society? Now, truly, if you don't care how society is ordered around you, maybe you genuinely are not political. But then at that point, I would simply say that you're derelict and you're completely shrugging off the responsibilities of what I think it means to be a godly Christian in society, which means to care about the world around you, to care for your neighbor, to make sure your neighbor is laboring under just laws. Now, to your question about should Christians be political? Yes, absolutely, we should be political. That doesn't mean that Christian churches on every single Sunday are preaching a political liturgy, or pastors are preaching politics every single Sunday. But it does mean that Christians need to care about the shape of the laws that are governing them. I will speak in churches, and it never fails where I will be asked by someone who is fatigued and annoyed, and the question goes something like this: I'm tired of the left owning everything. How can we push back against the left? And my response to that is, well, I can't just snap my fingers and all of a sudden be in power. That's a political question. What this actually reveals is that the left has had more of a concern about the ordering of society than Christians or conservatives have. So I hope a question like this, unintentionally exposes the laziness and the apathy in our own hearts from being able to say, well, we just want to be left alone. Okay, well, here's the problem. If you want to just be the ones left alone, the people who actually want to usher in their agenda are going to take advantage of your passivity, and they're going to manipulate you and steer you into the direction of society that they want according to the vision that they have planned. So absolutely, Christians need to be more political. We need to run for office more often. We need to run for school boards more often. But it doesn't just mean like the act of politics. It means that we need to form better institutions. We need to form parallel institutions, and that work to both undermine progressive dominance in society, but then also creating alternative visions for how society ought to be imagined. So I could keep going, guys. I want Christians to get a wider lens perspective on what it means to be political. And if you had a wider lens, it would necessarily draft you into a greater consciousness that you ought to care, because we're called to love our neighbor. We're called to seek the welfare of our city. And a part of that is impossible to do apart from a vision of the political.
Andrew, I'm curious, based on the fact that you are a professor of Christian ethics and public theology, if what you're scratching at in your answer there about politics is actually an issue of bringing our theology into the public square and seeing that robust faith being lived out and transforming our cultures and societies. Is that what kind of the core of a public theology idea is?
Well, it absolutely is. But here's what I would say. I've gotten asked the question before by a reporter, like, if you had society run according to your Christian ideals, what would it look like? And I said, well, it's going to look like nothing revolutionary at all. It's not going to look like you're forced to go to church. It's not going to look like, the dystopic Handmaid's Tale in Gilead that you might be familiar with. What a Christian society is going to look like, it's going to be a return to a robust creation order system. It means that we're going to have more people getting married. We're going to have more babies being born. There's not going to be, systemic taking of life of the unborn in our world. It's going to look like healthy, whole, intact communities. It's going to look like less theft. It's going to look like more honesty and virtue in society. And this speaks to something very important when you talked about how we relate our theology to our politics. Crucial to what I teach in my classrooms is that Christian theology is not an imposition on the world. Christian theology is an unveiling of what the world was originally designed to look like from the start, which means the non-Christian, in my ideal Christian society, is going to prosper and benefit even if they themselves are not a Christian, because a return to a Christian society is just going to look like a basic, just society in tune with what we have in Genesis 1 and 2 and in Genesis 8 and 9. I hope that makes sense. I'm really passionate about natural law theory, creation order, and helping Christians understand that what we're proposing for the world is not an alien imposition on the world. It's not a sectarian ethic on the world. It's a way for the world to learn to live accordingly with the design that was implanted upon it.
No, that's well said, man. And I think there's a ton there to unpack. I want to go back a little bit to the conversation you were having with David about Christians and politics. And I'm just going to sort of state a position, and then I'm interested in your take on it. For years now, for over 50 years, we've been talking about the Johnson Amendment, which is, the law, the IRS rule in place that says, churches can't endorse candidates ostensibly, and they have to refrain from political activity. This all came back to the head again in a recent court filing from the Trump administration, where they ostensibly implied that they were not going to be enforcing they didn't think the Johnson Amendment was constitutional. I would generally agree with that. I think most folks involved in the Christian legal movement would agree with that. They weren't going to be, the Trump administration was saying they weren't going to be enforcing it, which was great news, very exciting, all that kind of stuff. The interesting thing about it, though, was when it came out, a lot of pastors, a lot of friends of mine were celebrating, very encouraged, but they would say things like, "This is great news." Now, I'm not going to endorse from the pulpit. Pastors shouldn't be endorsing from the pulpit, but it's just good that we don't have this regulation over top of us. And my issue with those comments is, on the whole, pastors have assumed, or Christians, I don't want to put this on pastors, this is just general American Christians have assumed it is wrong for a pastor to endorse from the pulpit. I'm not saying pastors must endorse from the pulpit, but there's just a general assumption that says, well, we know it would be sinful or it would be wrong in some form or another for a pastor to do that. And that's the issue I have here, is that there's just a general assumption that, hey, that this is one thing in particular that pastors cannot talk about. If they did that, that would be wrong for them. Again, I don't even know if I would be excited about my pastor coming out and endorsing from the pulpit or talking about who they're voting for every single time. But if a pastor feels so led, or feels that they have an obligation to instruct their congregation in all of these other specific areas in culture, but for some reason, when it just comes to who you vote for in a very specific way, they shouldn't do it. That feels like an arbitrary line. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I have a somewhat, I don't know, convoluted, still working this thing out in my own mind a little bit. So I agree with you that line of, well, I'll talk about all the issues, but I won't talk about a candidate. It is a somewhat tenuous or porous line, because obviously individuals will either enact or not enact those things that you care for. So I want to, if you'll allow me to be a squish for a second, or a third wayer here, just for the sake of argument.
I'm texting Eric Teasel as you say this.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think a pastor has the legal right to endorse, should a pastor want to do that. I'm not sure, and I would never consider it sinful for a pastor, should they want to endorse from the pulpit. I would question at times the wisdom of endorsing from pulpits. Now, let's be clear here. There's a distinction between endorsing issues and endorsing a candidate. When you endorse a candidate, you're kind of buying the candidate, it seems. If you're endorsing the issues, I think you have a better way to say, what I'm interested is in seeing people who will advance the ball for my issues in whatever measurable ways they can. That's how I'm ultimately going to vote. I've got issues X, Y, and Z. Who will serve my interests in the categories of X, Y, and Z? Now, individuals in the congregation might be able to pick up by deduction, well, that sounds like candidate X rather than candidate Y in the current moment that we're living in. To me, that's probably what I would do in this situation, is focus on the issues rather than the candidate. But I do want to say there is a legal right to do so, to endorse a candidate. And let me also hold out the potential for there being circumstances where you ought to endorse a candidate. I'm not going to operate in the categories of never and always. I'm going to operate in the categories of sometimes and maybe. Those are going to be issues and decisions made on fact specific and context specific scenarios that require deliberation and decision making on a case by case basis. But as a general rule, I would say, to the extent that you can focus in on issues over candidates, that's what I would focus on endorsing.
No, I think that's, to me, that's exactly right. In that, I don't want to say, hey, whenever I start talking about this, immediately somebody's attending. Oh, Aaron wants, pastors to go out there and turn their, sanctuaries into a MAGA rally and things like that. And that's not what we're talking about. But it is just this idea that we don't talk about politics and we don't endorse candidates from the pulpit has, seeped so deeply into our Christian congregation that the secondary message that gets received.
Yes. Okay. So let me say something about that, because the effects of the Johnson Amendment were more secondary than substantive, because no one ever actually, like, in any real materially harmful way, used the Johnson Amendment to come after churches. The Johnson Amendment was really just a symbolic action to shut Christians up and to make pastors and churches fearful. That was really the effect of the Johnson Amendment. So I am happy for the Johnson Amendment to be gone, not because I'm looking for pastors to endorse candidates, but because pastors and churches need to eliminate the excuse that there is some type of legal dragnet hanging over them that's preventing them from weighing in. Even under the Johnson Amendment pretenses, it was really only saying don't endorse candidates on stationery. It was never actually even being applied to issues. Now the whole thing has been knocked clear, and there's no excuses for pastors to hold up any legal reservations at this point.
Well, and there's just the secondary message of the Johnson Amendment has just created this divide in people's mind that what the church has to talk about has nothing to do with politics.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw this with the abortion amendment here, that for the first time we saw more churches than ever speak out again on a political issue, speak out and condemn the abortion amendment. We talked about here, even on this podcast, that I've never had an issue where we were batting almost 1,000 going to churches saying, hey, will you speak out? And we were so encouraged. And then we see 1 out of 3 weekly attending churchgoers voted yes on the abortion.
Yeah.
And I would just say it's because the pastors had sort of handed over the political world for so long that by the time they actually dove in, their people said, this is not something for you to talk about, man. I don't care about your opinion in this area. You want to talk about how I shouldn't be cutting off people in traffic and I should be kind and all this kind of stuff? Sure. But this isn't your ground. And that to me is the bigger issue here of no, all of this is our ground. We want to approach it well. Again, we had a really good conversation with our staff this week about it. One of our team members who goes to a predominantly Black church talked about how their pastor did a really great job talking about Charlie Kirk, but is aware that their congregation has a mix of Republicans and Democrats. And so was very intentional about talking about it at the end of the service, because they didn't want that topic to distract from the gospel conversation they were having, the sermon they had to go through. And I thought that was such a really great like contextualization of leading a local church in this where we are today.
So I'm going to go back to one thing you just said that I found fascinating, that 1 out of 3 church-going Ohioans voted the wrong way. I think stats like that are a massive repudiation that kind of a leftist narrative that Christians are like politically obsessed and we spend all of our time at MAGA rallies and watching Fox News.
I mean, David is, but the rest of us hail it.
We can barely get him to work some days.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, like statistically, we know the average progressive is far more ideologically convicted and ideologically mobilized than their corresponding Christian conservative in their community. Ryan Burge, who's really not like a conservative evangelical by any stretch. I mean, he has the data on this that says like the more secular you are, the more politically agitated and activated and mobilized you are. So I think that we need to push back on kind of this progressive narrative that Christians are all politically obsessed. That is, I mean, I speak in churches all over the country, and that is never my experience. I would say in a typical congregation, you do have, you know, your like very aggressive, hyper activated conservative Christian. They are actually the vast exception to the majority of the people in the pews. I can think of my own Southern Baptist church in Louisville, Kentucky. I know it's a very conservative church just by general disposition. The number of people who I would consider to be like political savants who are leading, you know, voter registration drives is exceptionally rare. So let's just remember,
you're an old FPC guy. You know how hard it is to get a church to speak about anything like that. Yes. The stereotype we get is just so.
Here's think about this. The Southern Baptist Convention has roughly 13 to 14 million members. If the Southern Baptist Convention was to get 14 million people to vote in unison, we would be the most powerful political bloc in the United States. Yeah. And I don't think that we have all of our people voting, which, you know, one of the things I would love data on is what percentage of Southern Baptists didn't vote or don't vote. And I don't have any hunch on that. But it goes to show you that stereotypes don't live up to reality.
That's just so you guys know, that's Andrew's, as a good Southern Baptist, his long plot to bring back the 18th Amendment and bring back the ban on all alcohol. But thankfully, Southern Baptists can't agree on much. So you know.
I think you're outnumbered in this conversation. Just be careful. Well, Andrew, this has been a great conversation. I'm sure we could keep it going for even longer.
Seriously, I got like 3 other questions here, but we ran out of time.
Let's talk about IVF.
I know we can get to,
oh gosh. Bring me back. I'd love to come back.
We gotta talk.
Well, we'll get there. We'll have Andrew back. We'll try and find a time not too far down the road where we can get you back on the program, Andrew. But before we let you go, I know you've got your work out there for people to find. So what's the best way they can follow along if they want to check out what you're doing?
Yeah, my X account at Andrew T as in Thomas Walk, Andrew T Walk. I'm pretty active there, and I link to all my writings, and I have a podcast that I think Aaron has alluded to. It's called the Bully Pulpit Podcast. We link to the episodes on X as well. So give that a follow.
Andrew, thanks so much. It's been great having you today here on The Narrative.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Westler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan. And we'll see you next time on The Narrative.